Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by what is going on inside your body, but for some reason there is a disconnect between that experience that you're having and being able to identify what or why that is going on and the language to potentially describe it? If you have, it might be alexithymia. Alexithymia quite literally means no words for feelings. And something that I notice is that I have a large proportion of neurodivergent clients, in particular autistic, but also ADHD and some people with both. And we all tend to have this emotional soup going on. So like one word wouldn't be enough to describe what we are experiencing anyway. But nobody has done the work to teach us why that is, what that looks like, what that might feel like for us and our presentation in particular, in a world where emotional literacy is just not necessarily naturally encouraged. I know in Britain, we are often told to just keep strong and carry on. And to go back to the definition of alexithymia, to say that we have no words for feelings, I think that there is this misconception that that means no feeling at all, which is quite the opposite of the truth. There is not a lack of feeling and there is not a lack of emotions. Like I said, that actually is like this soup of emotion where the ingredients that are inside, the multiple components that make that soup up, are quite hard to define. The other reason that I really wanted to make this video is because I feel like there is another misconception, which is that I feel like when we identify that we might have alexithymia, then that's the end. That's just a dead end. It's just a dead road that we just accept that as it is. And what I've come to find is that I have taught many people, including myself, that that is not a dead end. You might experience alexithymia, but actually we can begin to increase our awareness ever so slightly, even with interoception, which I will go into in a little bit. We might be able to begin to piece together a pattern, which is one of our specialities, truth be told, of what that particular feeling and that sensation, when it brings up, links to other feelings, what feelings might accompany it. We might then be able to go on to be able to understand our why and how we're not crying about that I burnt my toast. In fact, we're crying at the catalogue of things that our body has stored and not had an efficient way to express. We are also then able to find the what contributes to those particular feelings arising in our body, which means that we can in turn learn to manage them better. So with awareness, with the why, with the what, we then can begin to do the journey of incorporating language that fits our experience personally. Because for me, language is of the utmost importance. And sometimes other people's descriptions about what they might mean about those particular words, for example, sadness, anxiety, maybe even selfishness, maybe even sensitivity. And we begin to incorporate it into our understanding of those things. And sometimes we actually have to define it for ourselves. And with those things, we can really truly change our experience with both our emotions, our understanding of our emotions, and our articulation of our emotions. And that stops the death sentence of having all of these overwhelming things stuck and stored in the body. Because remember, we are experiencing things to a higher degree, a higher sensitivity, often, not always, but a lot of the time. And if they've got no outlet and we don't understand them or we don't know how to express them, then this journey, what I am sharing with you, is the journey to you having a better relationship with yourself, with your understanding of yourself, and ultimately with other people too, because you will get to be able to convey from your frame of reference and have a deep understanding of self, regardless of whether that mirrors inside the world that you live in, as in the immediate world that you live in and the people around you. And that is a game changer. It is common, it is extremely common, in fact, for people who are autistic to experience alexithymia. Up to 50%. In fact, which is half of us, that is a lot of us. And I would go on to say that there's probably more, but they've never had even that word to describe their experience. So I think that the actual numbers are probably higher. But as a psychotherapist, I also know that it shows up in different areas too. It shows up in trauma. It shows up in PTSD, chronic PTSD. It also shows up in depression, and it also shows up in emotional neglect. The reason why I think these are really important to share is because, as you could probably imagine, if you're anything like me anyway, they speak very loudly as to why we have a disconnect with our body having an experience, the emotions that experience creates, and then us having the language to be able to express it and articulate it, or at least have people around us who can help us work through those particular things. I think that those things, and autism in fact, have a lot in common, which is the emotional disconnect that they might cause and the voltage of the emotional soup that is going on inside of us, and how we're not talking about an average everyday experience. We're talking about something that we almost, and we are in a time now where we're beginning to do this, but where we need new language, we need more advocates, we need more people who have these experiences like myself, but also like many others, who begin to give us the language, begin to ask us the right questions, begin to allow us to be safe enough to be able to have an experience, be a container for that experience, and then explore it to give somebody an understanding of themselves in that experience. So I want to go on to the reasons why, and again, please do add your own if you think that they're useful. Put them in the comments, because people, will find that useful, and I know that I always go to the comment section. But I want to talk about the reason why I think alexithymia happens in the autistic community. Also, all the ones I listed, from your depression, your trauma, your chronic PTSD, or if you've experienced emotional neglect of any kind. One of the reasons I think that contributes to us having alexithymia is our sensory profiles. We know that there's the hyper and we know that there's the hypo, but what I don't think that we really go into is how unique of an experience that is. And if we are not taught how to navigate how that experience feels for us, what we might need to do, the language that is required to understand that and be able to articulate that, and our sensory profile is going to contribute to our emotional literacy. An example of this is, say for example, a loud noise sends my nervous system into a fight response, and I'm a young kid navigating this particular experience. My volume is on 100 versus maybe somebody who might get startled by the noise, but they're not having necessarily the same nervous system, physical reaction, visceral reaction to it. When you react in a big way, or maybe a shutdown way, whatever it is that you do, you're going to be shamed. You're potentially going to be shouted at. You potentially, even if they don't do those things and they try their best to understand, they might not understand, because that is a personal experience of yours. So our sensory profile, in the many, many ways that it shows up in us and in our experience, is one of the reasons why I think alexithymia happens. Off the back of that, another reason, the second reason I think that it happens, is we all tend to experience early invalidation and conditioning. In particular, social conditioning, which is, if I, as a child, was quite happy playing on my own, you might be told that that's peculiar. And it causes like a disconnect between you just existing and that being okay, to how I exist is not okay, and you are not able to establish a healthy relationship with self. And we end up with shame. We end up with guilt. We end up with confusion about our understanding of self. The one thing I can't stress enough is that all people's brains, not just neurodivergent people's brains, all people's brains' primary function is survival. So if it comes to, especially in your early years, attachment and love and survival or self, you're very unlikely to choose the latter. You're more likely to choose, right, I know that if I just abandon that part of myself, or I minimize that part of myself, which causes a disconnect between you trying to, or being able to understand yourself, and you become the mask. You don't become the true version of yourself. So to understand your own experiences is going to be very hard for you to, one, connect to. Like I said, first thing is awareness, but two, be able to understand the whats or the whys of, And then 3, create the language of understanding and have that safety space where you can begin to find the language and the self-expression that you begin to understand that. I touched on this, but the third one is masking, which goes hand in hand with connection. The reason why we mask is to forge and maintain connections that might not be possible, or that we think might not be possible, if we show up in our entirety. And naturally, you can understand how that connects to alexithymia, which is, I have a disconnected relationship with myself. I might have done this so well for so long, I don't know who I am. So how would you ever expect yourself to have the language or the understanding about what is going on in your internal experience? Because the two things have been interwoven, and it takes the removal of the mask. It takes the long, deep, hard work of noting yourself in the mask to be able to return to yourself and then be able to find and forge the way in terms of your emotional literacy of yourself. Another reason I think that it happens is, which I kind of touched on before, is language gaps. I think that how somebody else explains something might be true for them, and universally they don't need a lot of information for it to make sense for them. They might say something that is roundabout. So an analogy that I saw was, I can't remember where I saw this, I think it was TikTok, was when they said stretch over in PE and try to touch the wall, and they mean just lean over as far as you can. They don't expect you to touch the wall, but they can use like inferred language and get to the same conclusion. And as an autistic person, we don't do that. We speak literally, but we also interpret quite literally. So we're navigating things through like almost speaking two different languages, lost in translation point of view. So this is the world, this is a language that the world is using, and then we're trying to figure it out from that kind of rule book, if you will. And that doesn't actually make sense for our experience, because actually we need it to be delivered, and we need to understand it in a certain way. That language is, like I say, one of the most fundamentally important things to somebody's journey in therapy, my journey included, that can't be lapsed about that. We have to understand, again, your personal profile and how you might need to have that profile considered when looking at your emotional understanding of your own emotions, your own awareness, your own whys, your own whats, your own experiences, and your own articulation of those experiences. The fifth reason why I think that we experience alexithymia is we have interoception differences. So I know one of mine, so I'll just use this one as an example. I'm not saying that most people experience this, but hunger shows up in my body and it feels very similar to fear, and it feels very similar to anxiety. So until I knew that about myself, one of my early profiles as a kid was I was called the dustbin, because I'm always wanting that sensory experience with my mouth, because I have such great fear around being hungry, because it feels so similar to fear to me. But again, even having the interoception differences doesn't mean that we can't begin, as we begin to explore in a safe environment. Actually, you might literally go and not eat all day because actually you're not noticing your messaging system of hunger. But that's okay. We can explore that from exactly your point of view. Begin to find the whats, the whys, the awareness, the moments that we can notice this and begin to add language to this. But we can only do that if we get to show up and say our experiences as they are. And the sixth and final reason for this video, but remember, put any more that you think that apply, is our cognitive differences. And for me, this is a big one. I touched on it a little bit with language, which is we probably need a lot more information. I don't know if I did actually say that, but we do need a lot more information in terms of language to be able to be like, okay, because our brain almost fires off into multiple what ifs. What about that? You've not told me about that specific thing. An example of this is my son said to me the other day, you know, PC. And I was baffled, because he didn't use the word ah. He didn't say, do you know a PC? Like a PC. But because my brain has received the information about understanding a PC as a PC. And he was like, the A's not needed, my mum will know what I mean. And he said, you know, PC. And I was stuck, and I was completely stuck. I couldn't get to the next part of our conversation because I did not know what he means. We need different things to understand ourselves. We need more information. We need more language. We need more input. And this goes, I guess, enters our support needs. We need more individuals around us doing videos like this, advocating for us, who understand our experience exactly it is and not trying to decode it to be or mean something else, or try to understand it from their frame of reference, because that is just not going to work. The thing that kind of contributes to this, which is a cognitive difference, is, which I've made a video on, please do go and have a look at that one, but is monotropism. And a lot of the world is polytropic. Most people are not monotropic. And if I'm not somebody who naturally can just dip into learning lots of information and that's just enough for me to get by in life, instead I've got gaps, but I actually will deep dive on one particular area, one particular subject, then we will have lots of understanding maybe in a particular area, but we might have gaps in things like emotional literacy, emotional understanding. We might have gaps in our awareness of self, or our awareness of other people, or our awareness in general. Or again, the opposite could be completely true too. So I think that they're the reasons why I think that more conversations about alexithymia need to be had, particularly in our community. And I know that there's lots of content creators out there, and I'm one of the smaller ones. And for me, that's okay, because I feel like they kind of do more generalized topics, and I like to obviously deep dive on it. So yeah, please do let me know what you think to this. And yeah, do you have alexithymia?